Hi, welcome to my Parsha shiur. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Today we are going to look at Parshat Bo. Let me begin with a story. In 1519, Hernan Cortes landed in Mexico with 11 ships and about 600 men, determined to conquer the mighty Aztec Empire. But there was a serious problem. His forces were hopelessly outnumbered. His men were nervous, uncertain, and, if things got rough, more than a little tempted to turn around and sail home. Cortes knew that as long as retreat was an option, it would always be in the back of their minds. The moment things got difficult, they would bolt. So he made a radical, almost unthinkable decision. He ordered his men to scuttle and burn the ships. No way back, no escape, no safety net. The message was crystal clear. They had only one path forward. Either they conquered or they perished. And something incredible happened. That single decisive act, it shifted everything. With no alternative, his men fought with unparalleled determination. They had to win, and against all odds, they did. The Aztec Empire fell and history was rewritten. This idea breaking with the past and having no way back is at the heart of Parshat Bo. When the Bnei Yisrael left Egypt, you could technically say they were a group of people moving from one place to another. But that's not what really happened. It was far more profound. They weren't simply changing location. They were stepping into an entirely new reality. For centuries, they had been enslaved, their identities shaped by oppression and servitude. They knew nothing else. But now, everything was different. They were no longer a scattered assembly of former slaves. They were being forged into a nation, a people with purpose, with destiny, and most importantly, as we will soon see, with the power to control their own time. And just like Cortes, Hashem ensured that there was no way back. The 10 plagues, culminating in Makat Bechorot, weren't only about forcing Pharaoh's hand. They burned the bridges to Egypt. The Jewish people walked free, but they weren't refugees who could one day return to their former lives. The ships had been burned. The road back no longer existed. There were moments in the years ahead when the Bnei Yisrael longed for the familiarity of Egypt, as crazy as that sounds. They complained about the hardships of the desert, the wilderness, and even spoke about going back. Zacharnu es hadog asher nocha b'Mitzrayim chinam. Nitna roish v'noshuva Mitzrayma. But no matter how much they grumbled, returning to Egypt was impossible. The Jewish people had emerged from Egypt as something entirely new. They could never go back to what they had been as slaves. Just as the burning of Cortes' ships forced his men to push forward into the unknown, Hashem orchestrated events so that there was no retreat for Bnei Yisrael. The only road was forward, to Har Sinai, to Torah, to becoming a nation, which is why the very first mitzvah given to the Jewish nation as a whole, right here in Parshat Bo, was Kiddush HaChodesh, the mitzvah of determining months, of controlling time. Now, at first glance, this seems like a strange mitzvah to introduce at such a pivotal moment. You might expect that the first national commandment it was going to be something more obviously spiritual, Shabbos, Tefillin, Korbanos. But instead, Hashem started with time. Why? Because time is the foundation of everything. And here's the fascinating part. In some sense, maybe in every sense, this mitzvah is a kind of fiction. The Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, would cross-examine witnesses to determine whether or not they had seen the new moon, and then they would declare the new lunar month. But the moon waxes and wanes on its own. It doesn't need the Sanhedrin's approval. It just follows its natural cycle, oblivious to our deliberations. But that's exactly the point. The Jewish people's nationhood is not about letting the world run on autopilot. It's about actively shaping reality. We don't just observe time, we sanctify time. We don't just exist within the world, we imbue it with meaning. Think about it. What's the difference between Saturday and any other day of the week? Nothing. It's just another 24-hour period. But when we recognize it as Shabbat, it becomes holy. What's the difference between Eretz Yisrael and any other land, any other country? Nothing. It's just dirt and stone. But when we sanctify it, when we treat it as something special, it becomes God's holy land. What's the difference between a random collection of people and a nation? Consciousness, purpose, identity, and the ultimate expression of this power, of this identity, is time itself. Unlike space, which we inhabit, and objects which we shape, time is intangible. It slips through our fingers, unstoppable and untouchable, and yet Hashem gives us the ability to control it, not by stopping it, but by deciding what it means. When Bnei Yisrael were slaves in Egypt, their time was not their own. They worked when they were told, rested when they were permitted, lived on Pharaoh's schedule. The very first step toward freedom wasn't just physical liberation, it was reclaiming time itself. Kiddush HaChodesh was the declaration that from now on, time belongs to us. It's not just about marking the passage of days, it's about declaring that time has purpose, that history has direction, that we are not trapped in endless cycles of fate, but participants. We are participants in a divine story that moves towards redemption. And that's why this mitzvah comes first, because if you control time, you control everything. Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, whose yahrzeit was this week, explains that Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctification of the new moon, is a lesson in human free will and renewal. The ancient world, particularly Egypt, saw nature as fixed. Society was rigid, the hierarchy was permanent, and everything was locked into place. Pharaoh was a god. The system was unchangeable, and whatever existed today would exist tomorrow, untouched. The Torah's message is the exact opposite. Hashem gives us the power to renew ourselves, just like the moon. The Jewish people, newly freed from slavery, weren't only shifting from one status to another, from being slaves to being free. They were undergoing a complete reinvention. They were recreating themselves as something entirely new. And the moon is the perfect symbol for this. It waxes and wanes, disappearing into darkness before returning full and bright. Life follows the same pattern. There are moments of struggle, of loss, of uncertainty. There are times when it feels like the light has gone out completely. But the moon always comes back. And so do we. That's why every single month we pause to acknowledge the new moon. It's a reminder, no matter how much we falter, renewal is always possible. We are never trapped by the past. We are never locked into our mistakes. We are not prisoners of fate. We are active participants in shaping the future. Now, this also explains why Rosh Chodesh isn't only an astronomical event, it's a human declaration. If the new month simply began when the moon reappeared, it would be just another natural cycle like the tides or the seasons. But that's not how the Torah designed it. Instead, witnesses must see the moon, testify before Beit Din, before the Sanhedrin, and only then is the new month declared. The message? Time doesn't control us. We control time. This isn't about marking celestial movements. It's about reinforcing the idea that we are not passive observers of fate. The Jewish calendar, the very rhythm of our lives, doesn't just happen to us. We define it. By giving us the responsibility to sanctify time, Hashem is telling us something profound. Our spiritual and national destiny is in our hands. Rav Hirsch also notes that the second day of Yom Tov, which is still observed in the diaspora outside Eretz Yisrael, serves as a powerful reminder of this principle. At first glance, it makes no sense. Well, because nowadays we have a fixed calendar. We know exactly when the holidays fall. There's no longer any uncertainty about Rosh Chodesh. So why do Jews outside of Eretz Yisrael, of Israel, still keep 2 days of Yom Tov? It's a good question. I get it asked every single Yom Tov. The answer goes beyond mere tradition. It's a deliberate reminder, says Rav Hirsch, of a time when Jewish time was dynamic, when we actively shaped it rather than passively followed it. In the era of the Sanhedrin, the new month wasn't predetermined. It was declared only after witnesses saw the new moon and testified before Beit Din. The problem? Communities far from Yerushalayim wouldn't always receive word in time about when Rosh Chodesh had been declared. So, to be sure, they kept 2 days of Yom Tov to compensate. But then, in the 4th century, everything changed. The fixed Jewish calendar was established by Hillel II, ensuring that we would always know in advance when the new month begins. In theory, this should have eliminated the need for a second day of Yom Tov, and yet Chazal insisted that it remain. Why? Because the second day of Yom Tov is not just a relic of the past. It's a living reminder of what was lost. Once upon a time, the Jewish people had the power to sanctify time. The Beit Din, the Sanhedrin, controlled the calendar. Yom Tov didn't just arrive, it was declared. The Jewish nation actively determined when they would stand before God on a Yom Tov. But exile changed everything. With the dissolution of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish people lost that power. The calendar was set in stone. We moved from an era of spiritual dynamism to one of preservation. And so, the second day of Yom Tov remains, not because we need it, but because we refuse to forget what we once had. It's a quiet but profound statement. Jewish time is meant to be shaped by us, and one day it will be shaped by us again. One could ask, weren't the Jewish people already a nation before they became slaves? Now, in a sense, they were a nation, but not in the way we think of a nation today. They were a family, a tribe, a group, a collection of individuals bound by common ancestry. They shared lineage, but they had no shared governance, no legal system, no independent national identity. They were the descendants of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, but they weren't yet a unified people with a collective destiny. The transition from a family to a nation required something dramatic. It required Yetzias Mitzrayim, exodus from Egypt. Until the Exodus, they had no independent framework of leadership, no system of laws, no unifying structure. They were an enslaved people living under Egyptian rule, subject to Pharaoh's decrees. They had no control over their own fate. The Exodus was their moment of national birth. This isn't just a metaphor. Chazal compare the formation of the Jewish nation to Maaseh Bereshis, the act of creation itself. Just as the world emerged from chaos into an ordered existence, Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, emerged from the chaos of slavery into the structure of nationhood. They were no longer a scattered, oppressed people. They were a nation with laws, with leadership, and, most importantly, with purpose. This idea appears in several midrashim, where the departure from Egypt is likened to the creation of heaven and earth. Just as the world was once a formless void until Hashem gave it order and meaning, the Jewish people were shaped into something entirely new. Now, what does this mean for us? We all experience moments where we feel stuck, trapped in bad habits, weighed down by past mistakes, convinced that change is impossible, that this is just who we are. But Parshat Bo challenges that mindset. It tells us something radical. Renewal isn't just possible, it's built into creation. History is filled with people who could have given up, but instead chose reinvention. Take Abraham Lincoln. Before becoming one of the greatest American presidents, if not the greatest American president, he failed repeatedly. He lost business ventures. He lost elections. He suffered deep personal losses. At any point, he could have resigned himself to failure. But he didn't. Instead, he embraced reinvention and persistence, and in doing so led America through its most divided and tumultuous era. Lincoln's story is proof that setbacks don't define you. What you do next does. And that's exactly the lesson of Kiddush HaChodesh. Think beyond just Torah learning. This idea applies to every aspect of life. A person struggling in their career, their relationships, their spiritual growth, any area where they feel stuck, can take this principle to heart. Start small. Mark time. Commit to gradual renewal. The key isn't perfection, it's persistence. The Jewish calendar itself reflects this truth. The moon doesn't go from darkness to full brightness in an instant. It waxes and wanes, steadily growing step by step until it shines again, and so do we. Let's talk about the Jewish calendar just for a moment, because let's be honest, it's inefficient. It's a strange hybrid of lunar and solar. You can never be entirely sure when a festival will be, except that it will fall somewhere around the same time of year. There's no precise fixed structure like in other civilizations. If you were designing a system for marking time, you'd probably want it to be straightforward, predictable, precise, and universally understood. Maybe base it entirely on the sun, like the Egyptian or Roman calendars. That way, everyone, everywhere, would always know exactly when important moments in the year would fall. No ambiguity, no adjustments, no confusion. But the Torah does something radically different. It gives us a lunar calendar, and not just any lunar calendar. It's a human-dependent lunar calendar. Instead of a system that runs automatically, where months are dictated by celestial mechanics, Jewish months don't begin until human beings declare them. Witnesses have to see the new moon. They have to testify before the Sanhedrin, and only then does the new month officially start. And when the system needed adjustment, the rabbis didn't tweak the math. They just added another month, a leap year. It wasn't a fine-tuned calculation, it was a decision by a bunch of rabbis. Jewish time isn't fixed, it's not determined by impersonal cosmic forces, it's not set in stone like the cycles of the sun. It depends on us, and that is the whole point. The Torah rejects a passive relationship with time. The Jewish calendar is not something we follow, it's something we create. We don't just live within time, we shape time. The ancient world worshipped nature. The rhythms of the sun and moon dictated everything: life, death, harvests, politics, even the so-called divine will of the gods. Everything was fixed, predictable, immutable. If the gods decreed something, that was that. There was no changing your fate. And nowhere was this worldview more deeply entrenched than in Egypt. Egypt was built on rigidity. Its entire system, social, political, and religious, was based on fixed hierarchies. Pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was a god. Society was a pyramid, literally and figuratively, and everyone knew their place. No one moved up, no one moved down. The past determined the future, and the future was already written. That's the way it was. Then along comes the Torah, and it smashes this idea to pieces. The Torah doesn't just reject the notion of a fixed, unchangeable world, it replaces it with a radically different vision of reality. You are not a passive cog in an unchangeable machine. You have the power to redefine reality. That's why the first mitzvah given to the soon-to-be liberated Jewish people is Kiddush HaChodesh, the mitzvah to sanctify the new moon. Not Shabbat, not Kashrut, not Tefillin, but the power to declare time itself. Because Judaism is built on the idea of renewal, of change, of transformation. The world is not static, and neither are we. But what happens when people stop actively sanctifying time? They drift, unconsciously, slowly, imperceptibly. not in one dramatic moment, not in a single act of rebellion, but little by little, without even noticing. Chazal tell us that the Musaf Korban on Rosh Chodesh atones for the accidental defilement of the Beis HaMikdash and its holy objects. What does that have to do with a new moon? The answer is profound. When people become disconnected from holiness, when they stop actively renewing their awareness of Hashem, their relationship with the sacred fades. Not all at once, not in a loud, defiant rejection, but subtly, slowly. They stop paying attention, they stop feeling, they stop caring, and before they know it, they begin to desecrate the holy. Not out of malice, but out of neglect. Their reverence dulls, their connection weakens. That's why we need monthly renewal. Without it, we risk becoming like Pharaoh, so hardened, so resistant to divine light, that even the most obvious miracles won't move us. Rosh Chodesh is our reset button, monthly reset button. It's our monthly reminder to wake up, to recalibrate, to search for Hashem's presence, even when we feel distant, even when the light is faint. Because renewal isn't just an opportunity, it's actually a necessity. This mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh strikes at the very heart of the pagan mindset, a mindset that still lingers today. Paganism isn't just about bowing to idols, it's about believing that nothing ever really changes, that life is just a cycle, endlessly repeating itself, that people are static. If you failed before, you'll fail again. If you're weak now, you'll always be weak. If you're born with certain traits, you're stuck with those traits forever. The past determines the future. That's the pagan way. What is will always be. That's the pagan view. But Judaism says otherwise. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva dismantles this idea completely. He insists that those who say people can't change, that you're born with fixed personality traits, permanently wired a certain way, those people have got it all wrong. Judaism is built on the belief that transformation is always possible. And that's why the very first mitzvah given to the Bnei Israel, as a nation, was Rosh Chodesh. Hashem takes Moshe outside, points to the tiniest sliver of the new moon, and says, "This is your model for life. This is the secret of the Jewish people. You're not trapped in an unchangeable system. You're not doomed to repeat the past. No matter how much darkness you've seen, you can always renew yourself. The light is just there." That is the essence of Rosh Chodesh. And that is what makes the Jewish people different. And that's exactly why this mitzvah was given in Egypt, not at Mount Sinai. It wasn't simply a technical instruction. It was a direct challenge to Pharaoh's worldview, to the idea that slaves will always be slaves, that power is fixed, that destiny is predetermined. Pharaoh believed in a world where nothing ever changed, where he ruled forever, where the weak stayed weak, and where no one could rewrite their fate. Rosh Chodesh shattered that illusion. Hashem showed Moshe the tiniest sliver of a new moon, the faintest glimmer of renewal, and said, "This is who you are. The Jewish people will never be static. We may fall, but we will always rise again. We may be exiled, but we will always return. We may lose the Beit HaMikdash, but we will one day rebuild it, because just like the moon, we always come back." The Yevonim, those Greek Syrians who sought to erase Judaism, identified three mitzvahs they absolutely had to stamp out. Shabbat, Shabbos, the foundation of Jewish life, Brit Milah, the physical sign of the covenant, and Kiddush HaChodesh, the sanctification of the new moon. The first two make sense. Shabbos, Shabbat, defines Jewish time. Brit Milah, circumcision, defines Jewish identity. But why was Kiddush HaChodesh such a threat to them? Why did they ban it? Hold that thought. Before we answer, let's look at the Arugas HaBoisem. He asks a brilliant question. If Hashem is all about truth and eternity, why create something as inconsistent as the moon? Think about it. The sun is steady, it rises, it sets, it never changes. Gravity is constant, it never takes a break. Nature is full of predictability and permanence. And then there's the moon. The moon grows and shrinks. It disappears and then it reappears. One night it's full and glowing, the next it's barely a sliver. Why would Hashem, who is absolute, unchanging, and eternal, design something so unreliable, so inconsistent, so fickle? What's the message? Because you can be sure there's a message, and here's the kicker. The moon was designed this way on purpose. It's not a glitch. It's not an oversight. God doesn't do oversight. It's deliberate, because the Jewish people are symbolized by the moon. And that is the fundamental lesson of Rosh Chodesh. We don't stay static. We go through cycles. We have ups, we have downs, moments of fullness, moments of emptiness. But no matter how much we wane, no matter how much darkness we go through, we always come back. And this isn't just true for the Jewish people as a whole, it's true for every single individual Jew. Life isn't a straight road. It's a winding path with growth and setbacks, triumphs and failures. There are times when everything feels bright, when everything makes sense. And there are times when darkness sets in, when things feel uncertain, painful, overwhelming. And if you're in that dark time, it's easy to think, this is it. This is who I am. Things will never change. But then comes the message of the moon. The darkness, it's temporary. You will rise again. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz once met a Holocaust survivor and he asked him, how did you not give up? How did you hold on and survive in those horrible, horrific conditions? The man's answer was chilling and deeply moving. He said, in the camps we had no mitzvahs, no lulav, no Chanukah, no tefillin, no Shabbos, nothing. But there was one mitzvah we kept. We kept Kiddush Levana. Even though it meant risking their lives, the inmates of the concentration camp would leave the barracks at night and recite the blessing on the new moon. And it gave them hope, because every month there was a new moon, a new chance, a new beginning, a new future. That sliver of light in the sky reminded them the darkness is never permanent. We will return. We will rise again. And this idea, the power of the moon to connect, to comfort, to inspire, reminds me of something very personal. My late father once told me that when he was in yeshiva in Lucerne in Switzerland as a teenager, he would often feel homesick. He missed his family. He felt far away. And then, when he felt homesick, he would go outside at night, look up at the moon and tell himself, my parents in London are looking at the same moon as me. It's like I'm with them. We are together. It was the same moon, the same light, the same quiet reminder. No matter how far apart we are, no matter how dark it feels, renewal will always come, and we are never truly alone. There's an astonishing Gemara in Maseches Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. It tells the story of Rav Elazar ben Aruch, one of the greatest Tanoim of his time, who made a terrible life decision. He left the center of Torah learning and went off to a place called Purgisa, famous for its incredible wine and luxurious hot springs. And that's where everything fell apart. He got so caught up in the indulgence, in the comfort, in the easy life, it was wonderful there, that he forgot his Torah. Can you believe it? And when he finally returned and tried to read the pasuk, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, from Parshat Bo, this month shall be for you, he misread it as Hachresh Haya Libam. Their hearts were deaf. Let that sink in. One of the greatest Torah scholars of his generation, a Tanner, no less, had sunk so low that he forgot how to read a pasuk in the Torah. It's devastating. But here's where it gets fascinating. The Arugas HaBosim points out that the letters of these two phrases are nearly identical. He didn't just blurt out something random. He wasn't reading nonsense. He was this close to reading the phrase correctly. Rav Elazar ben Aruch wasn't lost beyond hope. He just needed to shift, to realign, to adjust his vision, to renew. And that's the whole point. Even when a person falls to rock bottom, even when they feel disconnected, even when their heart is deaf, the Torah is still there, just within reach. It's not gone. It's waiting. And it takes only the tiniest shift, a single moment of clarity, a single decision to turn back, a single act of renewal, and suddenly, Hachresh Hayalibam flips into Hachodesh Hazelochem. The story of the moon is the story of every Jew. No failure is final. No exile lasts forever. No distance from Torah is unbridgeable, because just like the moon, we can always come back. That's what it means to be Jewish, which is why Hachodesh Hazelochem is the first mitzvah we received. It's the foundation of everything. A Jew doesn't believe in fate. We don't believe in permanent failure. What we believe in is renewal. We believe that no matter how dark it gets, the moon will return. No matter how lost we feel, we can start again. And just like the moon, we will always rise again. And on that positive note, we will end today's shiur. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you.